Rain-slick streets reflected Manhattan's restless glow as two black sedans idled at the hotel canopy. Their engines purred with the patience of predators. Ava Carter stood frozen between them, one carrying the promise of protection, the other a ghost from her past. Strangers streamed through the revolving doors, curious eyes lingering on the woman who could not move. She felt the weight of their gaze, her indecision captured in every breath. The valet shifted awkwardly, staff whispering with recognition of the man who owned one car, none for the girl who didn't belong. Inside, tinted glass, shadows waited. One door opened, an arm motioning her closer. The other hummed darker, a shape in the rear seat lifting a hand she once trusted. Ava's chest tightened. The city seemed to hold its breath. Between the curb and the canopy, her entire life narrowed to one impossible choice. 30 minutes earlier, the airport had swallowed her with indifferent light. Gate 15 flickered across the screen, her name printed neatly on a ticket that would never be scanned. Ava Carter clutched her boarding pass, watching couples lean into each other and families push strollers toward a future she had been promised. Her phone buzzed with a final message, a string of words that left her abandoned in public silence. The agent sealed the podium, metal shutters clicking like a coffin lid. A teenager laughed into her camera, capturing a sunrise Ava would never see. Passengers shifted forward, their joy a mirror to her disgrace. When the jetway closed, she stood still, a lone figure staring at an empty glass wall where her Paris vanished. Humiliation burned hotter than grief, a public wound she could not hide. The plane lifted without her, a silver animal devouring the night sky.
The terminal hummed with late-night echoes, luggage wheels and tired voices blurring into white noise. Ava pressed her palms against the cool porcelain of the bathroom sink, steadying a reflection that no longer belonged to her. Red-rimmed eyes stared back, framed by the careful lipstick chosen for a trip that no longer existed. She stepped into the hall and wandered until her legs found an empty cluster of chairs. The silence felt heavier than the fluorescent light above. That was when he appeared. A man in a charcoal suit stood at a distance, posture controlled, gaze steady, the kind of presence that belonged on the other side of bulletproof glass. He carried himself with quiet patience, offering no intrusion, only gravity. Ava registered the stillness around him, the way strangers glanced but dared not linger. His world was measured, his presence undeniable. Without warning, her story had a new direction. The suggestion came in the stillness of a midnight terminal. A private jet waited, its steps lowered, its crew already prepared for departure. Ava Carter's instincts rebelled, every rational thought screaming against the idea of following a stranger into the shadows of the tarmac. Yet rationality had not saved her from humiliation at Gate 15. Her future had been stolen with a message, her dignity left in a public corridor. What remained was survival, and perhaps something beyond. She weighed the fear of another empty night against the cold promise of anonymity inside her apartment. At last, she followed the stranger down a hidden service passage, the faint scent of jet fuel clinging to the air. Floodlights pooled across the tarmac, illuminating a sleek fuselage that crouched like a predator at rest. Separate rooms were promised, separate seats, and boundaries she clung to like armor. With trembling resolve, she climbed aboard.
Inside, the world softened. Leather reclined like a sigh, every edge curved to absorb fatigue. Soft amber lighting turned steel into warmth, the silence of wealth replacing the airport's harsh hum. Ava Carter sank into a seat that seemed too indulgent for someone still carrying tears in her sleeve. Across from her, Adrian Vale loosened his tie, a gesture that made command look effortless. She held a glass of cold water, the condensation steadier in her hand than her pulse. Engines rumbled, pressing her gently into the past as the runway blurred. Through the window,
Los Angeles fractured into a sea of stars falling away. Her phone buzzed again, another unanswered question from her sister. Ava typed quickly, forcing calm into her words, lying with the reassurance she wished was true. Overhead, the cabin shifted into stillness, cocooning her between humiliation left behind and a destination she dared not imagine. Beneath the hush of the cabin, unease coiled. At the forward bulkhead, two men stood silent, their posture military, their eyes unreadable. Adrian's world did not travel light. While Ava Carter tried to steady her hands around the glass, a phone lit in Logan Pierce's grip. He glanced at Adrian, his expression sharpening. On the screen, a surveillance still had arrived. Ava and Adrian captured together in the shadow of the jetway, her hand caught in his. The caption beneath read with mocking simplicity, "Choose wisely." Ava's stomach tightened. Her humiliation, her tears at Gate 15, her private failure, now cataloged and delivered into the hands of strangers. The knowledge hit colder than the cabin air. She was already being watched, already someone else's concern. The aircraft climbed into the night sky, engines steady, but the ground she thought she had left behind was following her across the Atlantic darkness.
Manhattan greeted them with polished marble and the quiet choreography of service. Staff who recognized Adrian Vale shifted with silent deference, their glances acknowledging power without words. Ava Carter walked beside him, suitcase trailing like a confession, every movement reminding her she did not belong in this circle of privilege. Bellmen and concierges measured her with polite restraint, their silence carrying judgments sharper than any whisper. She stood inside chandeliers and golden frames, her humiliation renewed under crystal light. To them she was no guest, but an afterthought, a stray orbiting the gravity of a man they could not refuse. Her shoes tapped too loudly against the floor, her reflection trapped in mirrors that multiplied her discomfort. Adrian moved with unbroken composure, yet even his presence could not erase the feeling that she was a guest, not in a hotel, but in a life scripted for someone else's inheritance. In the quiet of a luxury suite, Ava Carter leaned against the door, the city pressing through glass like a restless tide. The knock never came, only the faint sound of paper sliding against carpet. An envelope rested at her threshold, her name written in block letters, too precise, too deliberate. She knelt with hesitation, heart rattling as she unfolded the contents. A photograph stared back at her, grainy, lit by airport fluorescence. She and Adrian, frozen mid-motion, his hand extended, hers accepting. Across the bottom, words cut from cheap print formed a message that coiled with menace. "We see you." The humiliation was suffocating. What had been a private fracture at Gate 15 was now proof traded among invisible predators. Ava pressed the paper against the desk, her breath shallow. Luxury walls became thinner, their safety evaporating. The city beyond seemed to watch through every pane of glass, waiting.
The phone vibrated with a familiar name, her sister Jenna's voice crashing through the line with frantic urgency. Ava Carter stood at the window, the city skyline a blur beneath her, trying to form sentences that did not betray the danger she was learning to navigate. Jenna's anger cut through, her words fueled by fear, insisting Ava return, demanding explanations that could not be spoken aloud. Each pause between her sister's questions echoed louder than the city's traffic below. Ava felt the old shame flood back, humiliation layered now not only in the gaze of strangers, but in the voice of someone who loved her. She could not confess the truth, that her life had already entangled itself in shadows, that her choices no longer belonged entirely to her. The call ended with a threat wrapped in love, a vow to appear at her door if silence stretched too long. Morning arrived with sharp air and the city's metallic breath. Adrian Vale led Ava Carter down streets that glittered with frost, his security blending into foot traffic like shadows with purpose. They entered a corner diner, a place stained by time and blessed by coffee. Vinyl booths carried decades of conversations, chipped mugs refilled without asking. Ava sank into the comfort of the ordinary, pancakes and syrup grounding her against the unreality of the night before. Adrian sat across, folding a newspaper he never truly read, his eyes flicking toward her more often than the print. A man in a tailored suit entered the room, scanning it with precision. His gaze settled on Adrian, then shifted away. He left without a word. The silence was heavier than confrontation. Ava's chest tightened. Even here, among chipped plates and familiar smells, she was still a subject of surveillance. Safety remained a mirage.
Later, in the subdued glow of the hotel lounge, Adrian's cousin Mason approached with casual charm. His words flowed easily, his laughter rehearsed, but his details betrayed him. He referenced security footage from the airport, describing angles no guest should have known, no casual observer could have seen. Logan Pierce, seated nearby, stilled at the mention, his eyes narrowing with silent calculation. The conversation drifted onward, but the air shifted, charged with the recognition of a crack in loyalty. Ava Carter caught only fragments, yet something in the weight of Logan's silence unsettled her. The luxury around her felt like glass stretched too thin. If betrayal lived inside Adrian's family, then walls meant to protect her might also be plotting her ruin. She excused herself quietly, but the truth remained. The danger was not circling from outside. It was seated comfortably at the table, wearing the family name like armor. That evening, the lounge's golden light made Ava Carter feel smaller. Patrons' eyes traced Adrian Vale as he moved through the space, but their gazes slid across her with muted pity, as though she were an ornament misplaced. Sitting across from Adrian, she felt the press of those stares like judgment layered over skin. Her humiliation deepened, not through insult, but through invisibility. He assured her with steady presence, but promises could not erase how others saw her. She belonged to none of these rooms, yet she was trapped within them. The piano played softly in the background, notes stretching across crystal glasses and polished marble. Each sound reminded her that she was a guest in a performance staged for power. Invisibility burned as hot as exposure, a different kind of wound. And even as Adrian's gaze steadied hers, she wondered how long she could survive as an afterthought.
The church loomed in Red Hook, its stained glass shattered, its altar broken beneath decades of neglect. Adrian Vale led Ava Carter down a hidden staircase, the air colder with each step. The stone walls pressed inward, whispering secrets older than either of them. In the cellar, a chest waited on a pedestal, its lock engraved with the Vale crest. Adrian retrieved a key, its weight carried since his 18th year. The lock surrendered, revealing a leather-bound ledger. Pages cracked with age, ink faded yet legible. Names, dates, shipments, debts, all recorded in ruthless order. Among them, a signature Ava knew too well, her father's. The letters curved with a hand she had once traced on birthday cards. Beneath, a line in Latin read, "Paid in blood." Ava's knees threatened to buckle. The humiliation cut deeper than betrayal. Her father had bound her life before she was born, collateral in ink. The pages lay open between them, exposing generations of power traded through signatures and silence. Adrian Vale stared at the ink, his jaw taut, his eyes distant. He admitted quietly that inheritance had never felt like triumph. For him, legacy was a cage, its walls built on debts and bones. Ava Carter listened, her mind spinning with the knowledge that her father's hand had once met Adrian's in ink long before they had ever stood together in stone shadows. She felt grief collide with fury, humiliation bleeding into something heavier. The realization that her life had been scripted by men who had never asked for her consent. Adrian's voice was steady, but beneath it trembled a weariness he could not disguise. For a moment they shared the weight of history neither had chosen. In the dim light of the crypt, trust began to root itself in the cracks of ruin.
The restaurant glowed with chandeliers, every table filled with quiet wealth and careful observation. Adrian Vale's presence altered the air. Waiters attentive, patrons subtly shifting in recognition of a man whose influence eclipsed titles. Ava Carter sat across from him, aware of every glance drawn her way. Whispers carrying judgment she could not hear, but could feel. Midway through the meal, a waiter arrived with a folded ivory card upon a silver tray. Adrian opened it without expression. The words inside curved with menace. Some debts aren't lovers. Some are bloodlines. Signed simply, Cade. Ava's stomach tightened, her face flushing beneath the weight of unspoken speculation from surrounding tables. She was no longer just an outsider, she was spectacle. Humiliation sharpened under crystal light. The note lay between them like evidence, its presence undeniable, its message clear. In a room designed for performances of power, she was cast as collateral. The air shifted before she saw him. A figure stood near the restaurant's glass wall, sharp suit framing a familiar outline. Tyler Wade. The man who had abandoned her at gate 15 now reappeared, his eyes scanning until they locked on hers. Recognition collided with nausea. He had not disappeared into shame as she believed. He had been waiting, working, and now standing within reach of Adrian Vale's enemies. Ava's humiliation ignited into fury. The man who had discarded her with a message had instead delivered her into the hands of predators. She realized the text was not cowardice, but calculation. Patrons glanced curiously as the tension spread, whispers carrying her disgrace across white linen tables. Adrian's men shifted in the periphery, reading the scene with practiced calm. Ava's humiliation was complete. She was not abandoned by weakness. She was betrayed by design, her life a pawn's reward.
Night fell with rain, drumming steady against the windshield as Adrian Vale's convoy pulled toward a hidden brownstone. Ava Carter followed, shoulders heavy, seeking the refuge promised in secrecy. The doors sealed behind them, shadows dispersing into guarded silence. For a moment, the air carried the illusion of safety. Then came the explosion. The building shuddered, glass splitting, fire leaping into the storm. Ava staggered back, the blast wave searing her ears, her breath torn away. The safe house collapsed into chaos, flames devouring the very sanctuary meant to shield them. Adrian pulled her clear, his expression steel, but she saw it in his eyes. Betrayal had carved its path from within. The enemy had been told where to strike, their sanctuary mapped by a voice too familiar. Humiliation surged through Ava's chest. She had trusted protection that was never whole, safety that had always been a fiction. They regrouped in an unmarked vehicle, smoke still staining the horizon behind them. Adrian Vale's composure cracked for the first time. His fury was not explosive, but precise, sharpened into words that admitted what Ava Carter feared. Betrayal had come from his own blood. Mason's loyalty had fractured long before tonight, yet Adrian had waited for proof. Ava's hands shook as the realization sank deeper. She had not only been abandoned by Tyler, not only humiliated in public, but now she was carried through fire by a man who had known a traitor walked beside them. Humiliation curdled into despair, her voice caught between anger and disbelief. Adrian's jaw tightened, his silence heavier than his rage. In that moment, trust slipped again, fracturing the fragile line she had begun to build. Betrayal did not only circle from enemies, it was born in silence, hidden in deliberate omissions.
The city stilled as black cars lined the street outside a closed plaza. Soldiers emerged in formation, their suits pressed, their eyes expressionless. At their center walked Victor Vale, silver hair slicked, presence commanding without gesture. The patriarch's arrival transformed the night into ceremony. Ava Carter stood at Adrian's side, her pulse quickening as the weight of decades pressed into a single moment. Victor moved as if the city itself deferred to him, every step measured, every glance deliberate. His men parted to reveal a briefcase carried with reverence. Ava felt invisible again, reduced to an afterthought in the theater of legacy. The crowd of onlookers formed shadows, the humiliation sharper in its silence. Adrian straightened, meeting his father's gaze without flinching. The confrontation was not only personal, it was generational. Power demanding obedience, blood demanding continuation. The air thickened, the night bending toward an inevitable reckoning between inheritance and defiance. The briefcase opened with a click that echoed louder than the street around them. Inside rested two objects, each gleaming beneath harsh light. A gold pen engraved with the family crest, and a single bullet. Victor Vale's ritual was simple, ancient in its cruelty. One symbolized obedience, the continuation of power, and the surrender of Ava Carter into his control. The other carried death, final and uncompromising. The choice was spectacle, humiliation refined into theater. Onlookers watched in silence, their eyes fixed on Adrian. Ava's stomach twisted as she realized her existence was reduced to a bargaining piece displayed in ceremony. Adrian's hand hovered, but never reached. He refused to kneel, refused to sign, refused to accept the inheritance that had already claimed too much. In defiance, he chose neither. The briefcase remained open, its promise unclaimed, its threat hanging heavier than any bullet chambered in the dark.
From the shadows, a shot cracked the night. Victor Vale staggered, his command unraveling in a heartbeat. Gasps rippled through soldiers as confusion fractured discipline. The source emerged. Tyler Wade, pale, shaking, his gun still smoking. Ava Carter's heart seized at the sight. The man who had abandoned her, betrayed her, delivered her humiliation into predators' hands, now stood trembling, weapon raised against the patriarch. His face carried no triumph, only desperation. He fired not from love, but from shame, a final attempt to erase his humiliation. Soldiers moved swiftly, bullets finding him before he could fire again. Tyler collapsed, his body folding toward the pavement. Ava rushed forward, cradling him as life bled into silence. His eyes searched hers, regret etched deeper than fear. He died before words could form. The man who once discarded her ended not as coward, but as a broken figure seeking redemption. Victor's men erupted into chaos, the order of ceremony torn apart by the sound of betrayal. Guns drew in unison, echoes bouncing across the closed plaza. Adrian Vale pulled Ava Carter into the shadow of a marble column, Logan Pierce shielding their escape with precision fire. The world tilted into violence, each second carrying the weight of decisions made generations before. Ava's ears rang, her body dragged through the storm of muzzle flashes and shouted commands. The ledger pressed against her chest, heavier than iron. She realized its pages dictated who lived and who died tonight. Power bound in ink. Soldiers advanced, but confusion spread through their ranks. A patriarch wounded, a traitor executed, an heir defiant. In the chaos, Adrian's grip steadied her, guiding her toward an exit carved in shadows. Survival demanded escape, but the fight was no longer just against bullets. It was against destiny itself. They climbed stairwells two at a time, concrete walls reverberating with distant sirens and fading gunfire. The rooftop opened above them, the city sprawling in electric veins, towers cutting into a bruised sky. Wind clawed at Ava Carter's hair as she leaned against the ledge, lungs straining. Adrian Vale joined her, the weight of lineage written across his shoulders. In his eyes, exhaustion fused with resolve. He admitted without words that he would not inherit chains, would not wear the crown forged in secrecy and blood. The ledger in Ava's grip trembled as if alive, the weight of families, debts, and crimes demanding to endure. Adrian turned from the skyline, his jaw set. The answer was no longer survival or obedience. It was destruction. Beneath the glow of towers, among the hum of sirens,
he made his silent vow. The empire built in secrecy would not be passed forward. They arrived at a warehouse on the river's edge, its windows shattered, its interior hollowed out by neglect. Inside, flames licked the shadows as Adrian Vale struck a match. The ledger rested atop crates, its leather curling as fire consumed paper. One by one, generations of secrets, debts, and betrayals dissolved into smoke. Ava Carter watched the ink blacken, names vanishing, accounts turning to ash. The fire roared with hunger, devouring the power once traded like currency. Adrian stood beside her, eyes reflecting orange light, face carved by resolve. This was not victory, it was obliteration. He was burning his inheritance, severing his name from history, and in doing so, dismantling the cage meant to bind them both. Ava felt heat sting her skin, yet within the destruction, she found release. Humiliation turned to defiance, shame transfigured into choice. The empire that once defined them dissolved, leaving only two figures unshackled.
The Mediterranean sun warmed cobblestone streets, sea air carrying salt and laughter. A cafe overlooked the harbor, tables scattered beneath striped awnings. Ava Carter sat sketching in a worn notebook, her pencil moving with quiet focus. Across from her, Adrian Vale returned with 2 cups of coffee, his movements unhurried, his suit replaced by linen. Tourists bustled nearby, oblivious to the story buried in another country's soil. The ledger was ash, the dynasty silenced, the crown discarded. What remained was morning sunlight, the sound of waves striking stone, and the soft presence of peace earned through fire. Ava adjusted her sketch, tracing the outline of a chair from Gate 15, the beginning of everything. She looked up as Adrian set a cup before her, their hands brushing, steady, unspoken. In this place there were no shadows, only 2 people who had walked through ruin and found their way to daylight. The cafe's hum blurred into the rhythm of waves beyond the harbor. Adrian Vale leaned back, gaze fixed on the horizon, words forming quietly, though they carried the weight of a life refused. The name he once bore no longer mattered, its echoes smothered in ash. Beside him, Ava Carter closed her sketchbook, her eyes meeting his with certainty. She had been discarded, humiliated, hunted, and yet she endured. Together, they had survived an inheritance meant to claim them both. Now, peace lived not in grandeur, but in anonymity, in shared coffee and stolen sunlight. Their future would not be defined by ledgers or rituals, but by choice carved each day. The world had lost interest in them, and that anonymity was their sanctuary. Across chipped porcelain cups, they exchanged a glance that carried no ceremony, no performance, only the relief of 2 lives rebuilt from humiliation into freedom. Ava Carter lifted her phone, the screen reflecting her sister's face across continents. Jenna's eyes widened with disbelief, then softened with relief. The conversation flowed with laughter threaded through lingering tears. Ava described the harbor's warmth, the cafe's quiet charm, the life she was building away from shadows. She left out the fire, the blood, the choices that had cost so much, but her sister did not need the details. What mattered was survival, and the truth that Ava was safe. Humiliation once carried across phone lines had been replaced by reassurance, the voice of a sister who no longer had to fear silence. Jenna promised to visit, her words brighter than the Mediterranean sun overhead. The call ended with smiles, the kind born from fear finally laid to rest. Ava placed the phone beside her sketchbook, her chest lighter than it had been in a year. That evening, Adrian Vale stood on the balcony overlooking the sea. The horizon stretched infinite, its colors dissolving into shades of dusk. He held no glass, no ledger, no symbol of power. His hands rested against weathered stone, scarred palms free of expectation. The man who once carried an empire's weight had set it aflame. The silence pressed differently now.
Not the silence of fear or obedience, but of release. He watched fishermen draw nets, their shouts carried on wind, their lives unbound by secrecy. For a moment he envied their simplicity, yet found peace in anonymity. The crown he had never wanted was gone, the dynasty forgotten, his father's name lost in smoke. Only choice remained. He turned back toward the cafe, where Ava sat sketching, a single lamp flickering above her. The night welcomed him not as heir, not as son, but as a man finally free.
Inside the quiet of the cafe, Ava Carter opened her sketchbook once more. Charcoal traced delicate lines across the page, shaping a chair from memory, the plastic seat of Gate 15, where everything began. The details returned with painful clarity. The harsh overhead lights, the scuffed tile floor, the silence after the crowd had boarded. She drew not to relive humiliation, but to trap it, to transform it from wound to artifact. The sketch became both record and release. She flipped the page, beginning a new image. The Mediterranean harbor beneath sunlight, the present layered over the past. Closing the book, she exhaled slowly. Her story no longer belonged to surveillance photos, ledgers, or whispered judgments. It was hers alone, inked and sketched with intention. The shame that once defined her had become art. For the first time, Ava felt that her life was not a debt, but a canvas. The cafe quieted as the evening deepened, lanterns swaying gently above cobblestones. Adrian Vale placed a fresh cup before Ava Carter, their fingers brushing briefly as porcelain touched wood. She looked up, eyes meeting his, steady, unbroken. Around them the harbor shimmered in twilight, its waters carrying the promise of ordinary days. The world no longer whispered their names, no longer hunted their movements, no longer cared. That anonymity was their triumph, greater than any empire burned. Ava closed her sketchbook, the image of Gate 15 sealed between pages. No longer an open wound, but a finished chapter. Adrian leaned back, shoulders unburdened, face softened by the calm he had never known. They lifted their cups, the sound of porcelain clinking carrying across the night. Not like gunfire, not like ceremony, but like peace itself. The story ended not with power seized, but with dignity reclaimed in silence.